is Behind the Games from newoverlords.com, where we seek creators of all kinds to find out what's behind our favorite games. With your hosts, Jeff and Seema.
This is New Overlords Behind the Games podcast. And from our Midwest studio, I'm Jeff Illemek.
And from our Northeast studio, I'm Seema.
Today, we're joined by James Silva and Shane Lynch of Ska Studios, the creators of Salt and Sacrifice, among a bunch of other really great indie games so far. James and Shane, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for being here and good seeing you again. So I met with you at PAX West, another of the handful of awesome studios that I met with at PAX, which was really cool. Your game and your booth was pretty eye-catching. So as I was walking by, it was over on the left. It was one of the sort of one of the games that was sort of first in the long line of games there along that one side. But it looked really of interest to everyone that was stopping by. I liked how you had that big couch out there and people were sitting down and playing it. And the art in particular really caught my eye. And it was really interesting to talk to you, James, and Shane, who are doing it, and James's art, and talking about that, and then the style of the game. And then when I started talking to you guys, I realized that between us, there's a little bit of a Microsoft connection. So we'll get into that when we talk about your origin stories from my days at Microsoft, which I don't think overlapped with yours, but did some similar pieces there that we have had fun with. But let's kick it off with what we like to start with, which is the game. So that we can paint this picture for people about what you guys are working on, what it looks like, sort of the core of the current project. And we'll talk about other things after that.
So I'm so happy that the term Souls-like is a term now, because in trying to describe Salt and Sanctuary years ago, it was just action RPG platformer where using all these descriptors, and then
it's so convenient to have a word.
Yeah, I mean, it was maybe like a year or two after Salt and Sanctuary came out, and then you'd start to see a lot of these types of games coming out, and that's when it just became more convenient for everyone to just use the term Souls-like. So yeah, Salt and Sacrifice, it's a Souls-like, and the big change between Sacrifice and Sanctuary is we we introduced Monster Hunter elements, and introduced a lot of online elements as well. The idea is like you have sort of the same feeling, same progression, same systems where your decisions matter, where the game is unflinchingly difficult, but if you set your build up well, you can prevail. But now you can do it with friends, and you can impede the progress of others as well. And the netcode, that's all Shane.
Yeah, I came in and brought all the conflict with other players. Conflict in code and conflict with people.
But you're right, it is great to have these vocabulary words to describe these games, and we're getting more and more of them. There's new ones sort of being invented over time, last few years, the battle royales, and we talk about roguelikes, and we talk about all these things. The Souls-like, I think, is a good example, but I think people out there, they gotta, not everybody understands what all those words are. So in addition to the action combat, there is the RPG elements, which I really like. The ability to both craft and get different armor pieces, set up your build, set up your character, pick a little bit of backstory, because there's sort of like story elements to where you're going, which I thought was interesting.
Every so you're part of this group called the Marked Inquisition, and all of you in the group have committed some crime. In exchange for serving the Inquisition, you are given,
and you get to pick your crime.
You get to pick your crime. You're given a stay of execution. I think that's the term. You get to keep your head, and but in return, you must hunt mages. For how long? That's the question. But you do it, and you can survive that way, and that's a nice trade-off.
And the mages are the bosses. Basically.
Right.
Yeah. And instead of one death, now you get many deaths. Yeah. So did you pick the right one? I don't know.
Stay of execution, except all the times that you'll be executed by the mages as you try to get.
How did you decide? Like, we've asked other people this. How did you decide that you wanted to be on the difficult end, like to make the combat and the encounters difficult, as opposed to like a walk in the park?
I fell in love with Dark Souls like so many other people.
Well, that
And so I mean, if you you go back to the genesis of the studio back in 2007, and that was just me. Shane and I connected, was it 3 years ago, 2 years ago? And we've been playing. We've known each other. We've been friends forever, but we started the studio that made Salt and Sacrifice like
2.5 years ago.
Yeah. But yeah, way back when it was just me. The game that kind of kicked it off was called The Dishwasher Dead Samurai. And that was very much like I had gotten obsessed with Devil May Cry 3, and I was like, I wonder how this would play in 2D, and it
was very difficult too. Like I played through it. Remember, like it's not a simple game. Like you need to practice and redo bosses over and over again.
And in Salt and Sacrifice, you need to work on your gear and pick the right talents
builds, learn the fight, and
learn the fights.
As you said, reconstruct your character slightly or get a different gear set to match a boss a little bit better. But that Souls-like approach can be really, really satisfying. So across the genre of games, and not being afraid to just go in there and try it and die and learn the fight and expect to die over and over. You've got to understand that mindset. And I think a lot of gamers may not. And they may approach a game and say, "Oh, I tried this once or twice, and I can't get through this fight. This is too hard."
Well, I remember when I first played Demon's Souls when it was released. Was it 2007, 2008? What was it? 2009? I forget what the year was. How long ago was it?
Those all sound right.
One of those years. You know what? So I'm really into retro gaming right now, and I think when I played that, it had the feeling of what I remember when I used to play games back in the day. Like you didn't used to just beat Mega Man. Like you had to keep trying. Like it was hard. Mega Man was a very difficult game. Like those kind of games required failure, and I see it now. Like with my daughter when we play like a retro game, and like oh, Mario just died. Oh, I got to do it again. But it's like that concept of losing and having to restart a level isn't really in a lot of games these days. And I think bringing that back brought back something that had been missing from a lot of games for a while.
I definitely think there's a gamer who wants that for sure. Yeah,
I'm gonna throw this out there. All of the Souls games are easier than Mega Man 2.
Well, I would say that all the Souls games are fair. Another interesting mechanic, though, I think that Souls brought in with having the RPG elements was that you have a sort of a natural difficulty bar. Like you can, based on your character build, you kind of have to know the mechanics of the game to do it, though. But it's like you can make the game easier for yourself if you choose to. Like many times I'll purposely not use magic and I'll only use like this one weapon or whatever to increase the difficulty. And I think in other games, like you can do challenge runs to come up with it, but I think like the Souls like really have it built in where you can kind of like set your own sort of like restrictions to make the game fun for you.
And there's not a single way to approach the fight necessarily either. And that's part of the fun of it. That's sort of the RPG part of it. You can gear up a little bit better. You can change your gear set or your approach. And that's puzzling that out is a bit of it, but learning the fight and the slow progress on learning each bit of the fight as you die over and over and over again, that's a rewarding part of that gaming experience. So that's really cool to have in there.
I will say to the point you raised about how it's not for everyone. So Salt and Sanctuary, way back, I think like 2015, the QA studio I was working with, they asked, would you like to do some UX testing? We go to this meetup, we bring in volunteers from a meetup, we give them Amazon gift cards to play your game for an hour, we record them for an hour. You get to watch them play while they're recording. It's very creepy. But no, so we took on this process, right? So I'm just watching from the closed YouTube stream, and like they were not Souls player. One of them was a Souls player. It was 10 people total. There was one gal who was a Souls player. There were 9 people who were not Souls players. The 9 who were not, it was just an hour of agony per person. And when if they actually killed the first boss, they would just keep scowling. The faces of frustration, and then they would finally beat the boss, and they'd just be like, oh, yeah. Good. All right. But the one person who got into it, she, died a few times, figured out the pattern, beat the boss, then started exploring further into the island. And like when it was over and the test administrator was like, all right, thank you for your time. And, we'll have follow-up questions. She could not stop talking about the game to them. She was like, I figured this out and I learned, and then when I got here, I found this. And then I wanted to go this way, but I couldn't get, like she was into it. And that was like the confirmation that I was doing something right.
Right. Absolutely.
And the 9 people, I mean, it's just, if you make a game for a niche audience, if they're not the 9 people, if they're the 1 person, that's
and
fine,
10% of the market, that's okay.
Yeah, I know, right? That's pretty good.
Exactly. And I think because of Elden Ring and the big titles, this niche is really growing too. People are getting it. They're sort of like learning to understand.
It's very much grown. I mean, look at Demon's Souls. Almost no one knew when Demon's Souls was out what it was.
Oh yeah.
Right.
I heard about it because I was in a GameStop, and like some guy was like, I was like, yeah, I'm looking for this kind of game, and he was like, oh, I have one for you. He's like, here's like this game, and we talked about it for a while, and I was like, oh, it sounds amazing or whatever, and I took it home, and like had it not been for like one random suggestion, I never would have picked it up. And from there, I started telling friends about it, and but most of them all just bounced off of it. But I think you're right that now it's become more approachable. We saw Elden Ring was a massive success. I think some of those like adventure elements they added kind of like made it more approachable, even though it's a really hard game. It's actually maybe it's one of their hardest, at least boss wise. But
depending on how you approach it,
yeah,
absolutely. It was a little too hard for me. I mean, I didn't get it.
I really love that there's a niche for hard games because it's like we don't have to think everyone needs to like a hard game, and we don't have to think everyone needs to like a butterfly game, and everyone needs to like a draw your own music game or whatever. I just love the fact that we're getting to have games now for everybody.
Yeah, right. and I like, I think every game should be approachable to some degree. Like you don't want a game hard and mean for the sake of being hard and mean. And we've made even adjustments in our current game, even post-release, because some things might be a little bit too cruel in the game, and we didn't want it to just, we don't want you to hate the game. At the same time, we want it to feel fair. Finding that balance is hard. It's very difficult. But because we do have, the RPG elements in the game, you can sort of balance your way through it and make it easier, which does help. But I still think that, there's probably a certain set of players who just will never be able to play this game. It's just too difficult. And that's, you can talk about accessibility and what does that mean in terms of difficulty for a long time, but that's a very hard thing to balance as well.
And
honestly, we didn't really approach it. But we kind of made this, it is the difficulty it is, and we hope people respect that and like that. But I'm sure there's some set of people who they like to play the story, but they can't because the game's hard, and it's unfortunate. But the difficulty in the game is kind of just part of it.
That's
right.
If you've made that decision that's sort of the core, that's what it is. There are plenty of games out there, and serving the people that like this particular game is not wrong. And we shouldn't feel bad about making that kind of game. Understanding on the broader scale, like as you suggest, and it's really interesting that you talk about that, and it's clear that you do understand that there are questions around accessibility and the kinds of games that can be available to more people of all kinds of, not only from a difficulty level, but a control scheme and all of those kinds of aspects. That's
like
important
look at The Last of Us 2 was like super detailed on all the accessibility options and things. And honestly, we didn't do that for our game mostly to run out of time. But I'd love to revisit that at some point and see what we can do.
And that was their focus too. So they're much more story driven from that perspective too. So ensuring that the people that want to see that story can go through it. And it's less about just making sure that less about the mechanics, which this game
it's actually funny because I actually can't play that game. It's inaccessible to me in a way. The death scenes are too personal. They're too like you watch the light of someone's eyes go out, and I'm like, that's just too much for me. I can't do that. And I don't mind blowing a zombie's head off. That's totally fine. But like if you're like holding someone down and inserting the blade and like watching them like go out, I'm like, I can't. I'm sorry.
And that's explicitly in the tech too. There's like a shine to the eyes that dulls when like they actually explicitly. Someone spent a lot of time implementing that technology.
I watched some people play because I was a little bit, since it wasn't me playing, I could watch, like be removed slightly from it, and I'm like, this game looks really amazing, and I won't be able to play it, but that's okay.
So you started to talk a little bit about the origin, and you, James, in particular, just started off, and then we'll talk about how Shane came in, where you came from there. 15 years. So 15 years is a long,
doing it.
is a good long time, and you've probably seen the game industry change. So what did it feel like to start up when you first started? So you were sort of on your own, by yourself, and did you go full time 15 years ago, or did you still like have a day job and do it on the side? What is that origin story?
So I submitted this game, Dishwasher Dead Samurai, to a Microsoft contest, and then I was 2 months away from graduating school, and I college, and I found a day job, right? So I got this day job, and it was, it might have worked in the long run, but in the short term, it wasn't my first, like, I loved making games, right? Having to do like applications development, it was crushing. And then realizing that I didn't have enough time to work on my, my fun games when I got home anymore, because I was just so committed to this job. That was pretty crushing too. But about 2 months into that job, actually got someone from Microsoft contacted me, and they were like, "Hey, we're gonna announce the winner of this contest. You coming out?" And I was living in upstate New York and fairly poor, and I was like, "Well, I'm not flying out, just getting a hotel and all that just for." And they were like, "What if we took care of that for you?" And I still was like pretty convinced that, okay, maybe they're doing this for everyone, right? Maybe they're flying a dozen of us out, and it's, because my game was the very hand drawn style. It was very muddy. It was very icky. It was very stylistic, but I just assumed like a more polished 3D game would just take it by default. But yeah, Dishwasher and another game ended up both getting publishing contracts out of that, and then I stayed on at my day job for 2 more months to just try to save up as much as I could. But they knew what had happened. Like they had followed me. They followed the story from as it was going on, and they're like, "Look, we know you're quitting. We have to figure out when. We have to hire your replacement." So yeah, about 2 months of that, and then it was maybe another year of just working on my own, running through any and all savings I had accumulated at that point. My parents were giving me about $500 a month to not move home, because I shared this apartment that was like, it was $550 a month shared between like 3 and 5 of us, in upstate New York. So my share could have been like $100 a month in this apartment, and then the rest was like food. And with all of those financials, I managed to get the game finished and launched with like, maybe $500 left in my bank account. And then it did well, and then I made another one, and that's okay, and I made it. And then and then 15 years passed, and here we are today.
So has it always been your original artwork? I mean, that's what's really got me about.
Yeah, mostly. Game. I've done a bit of collaboration here and there, but it's always been, I've done well over. I mean, it's always the majority my art.
That's a lot of art. So if anybody looks at the games, you go to Ska Studios website, you can see both the trailers, you can see the current games. There's a lot.
It's all hand drawn. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah. So you can't find the first game anymore. It's just it would need a lot of work.
Dishwasher Samurai.
Yeah, Dead Samurai. Yeah, it would take a lot of work to modernize it. I mean, it's very blurry, very low res. I actually drew that with a mouse. That was before I got a tablet. Really? And the tablet I use is, I don't know if this will come in well on the screen, but it's just like a little 4x6. I don't use a fancy screen you can draw on or anything. I just still use this little tablet.
Wow. Well, again, things changing over time. It seems today that the tool sets and the industry and the accessibility of getting games self-published, you can push it out there on Steam and not have to get a contract with a platform. It seems much different these days. So
self-publishing didn't exist when you first started this.
Yeah, it did it.
Yeah, Salt and Sanctuary is the first game I self-published. Because it was Dishwasher Dead Samurai, and then Dishwasher Vampire Smile was the sequel to that, and then Charlie Murder after that, and Charlie Murder came out right around, it was on Xbox 360, I'm sorry, but it came out right around when Xbox One was like gonna launch in like a month or so, it it very much felt like a, sort of like a last hurrah. And it didn't do too well, but it did all right. And it was on
the Xbox Live Gold games.
It was on Games with Gold for like a month. Gold, so the way the timeline works is like all of these people who for them Charlie Murder was like their formative memories. they were like between like 8 and 12 when they played it, or they're like this is the best thing ever. Now they're all in their 20s and they're like, you got to make a sequel, and I'm like, look.
Well, it's like even before helping or for joining up with James, like I used to come by and help out with the PAX booth. And I did that for, I don't remember how many years, maybe since like 2015-ish, 16-ish. I forget when I first joined up with you there. But like people would come by and ask about Charlie Murder all the time. And you always be like, oh, well, it didn't sell very well. But in reality, I think what happened was a lot of people got it for free and they played it. And then you didn't get anything out of that other than the, whatever they gave you. But it's like, but I think there is an amount of people there that like you said, like they played it at a certain point that had an impact on them and they're interested in it.
You've got that core fan base out there. Maybe something to come back to in the future. You'll have to think hard about that. But
I am asked a lot about it, so
it is a constant question.
The thing is, I mean, I'm always asked about, are you going to make a sequel to everything? So there's only two of us, right? We have to.
But that's a great question.
Also, sometimes it's very few people that are very vocal.
Yes. So if like 5 people are pinging you nonstop, I mean, it's still just 5 people.
Just 5 people. So. Yeah. That we've got that Seattle connection, and then Shane, you've been around that area as well. So my Seattle connection, of course, is I worked for Microsoft from '94 to 2007. I was around Microsoft when the Xbox got invented, which was exciting times. So Shane, you were out there. Why don't you explain sort of your origin story?
Yeah.
How
so
that came in?
What's interesting is I think it was like 2007. Microsoft introduced this API called XNA, and that's what James used to produce. I mean, pretty all the games, although now it's become monogame. But
which we're still using.
Early when they first announced it, there was an internet relay chat channel that we used to go to, and that's kind of when I first got to James and I got to know each other a little bit there. I was using technology as well. I was working for a research center at a University of Maryland campus. And while we were there, it was all interactive interactive art. A lot of it was also or interactive like software. So we did things like we worked with like NASA to create like something that shows off one of their satellites they're trying to get funding for. We took some things like scanning in like Henri Matisse's like sculptures and then presenting them in a way that that could be viewed like in like a touch panel display and 3D graphics and stuff. And I started using XNA for doing that stuff, as well as we wanted to create some games there as well. So we did some like it was the idea behind this game was like, could you take a bunch of different types of gameplay styles that potentially was easier to play for different types of mindsets, different types of intelligences, and then like have those people work together in a game. So we put that together and we were like, oh, if we put it on the Xbox 360, that kind of legitimizes the idea. It's like, hey, look, this could be a game that's on a console or whatever. And then that never got released because again, it's just a research lab, so we're pretty much, even though some stuff we shown off and some stuff resulted in things like a satellite actually being launched in space later on, or we had some of our stuff shown off like at the MoMA. But it was nothing was like we weren't making any products there because it was a state funded thing. And I was there for a while doing that, and then at some point, one of my interns had I think he was interning at the time, not my intern, but he was interning at the same place I was at. Had his buddy from Microsoft come by to come check out what they were doing, and we got chatting about stuff, and I was kind of showing him around and showing him what we're up to, and he was like, "Why are you here?" I was like, "Well, I'm still going to school and all this and blah blah blah." And he was like, "Huh?" He's like, "Okay." And then like a few weeks later, he like contacted me and he's like, "Hey, you want to come work at Microsoft?" I was like, yes, sure. And so he's like, let's fly you out. And so, we did the whole interview circuit. And for that one, it was interesting because it was a studio in Pioneer Square, which is like this downtown Seattle. It was removed from the main campus.
Yeah.
And Jay Allard had a studio there. Jay Allard was, one of the original Xbox guys. And he was working on some interesting things at the time. Courier was one of the things. Do you remember Courier, like the folding tablet
Yeah.
that never happened, but it was like
Not that version. I mean, now they have the
that,
Duo. But
it lived on in other ways, but that version didn't actually happen. So I got the job offer, and as I was getting the job offer, actually Jay Eller had quit and was leaving Microsoft, but they still let me join the team, and then from there I got absorbed to the chief software architect team. Our team got absorbed into, which is Ray Ozzie, which is probably another name you're familiar with.
Then, yeah.
But then of course he left 6 months later. So it was at that point we had developed some technology. It was like we had developed something at the time it's called Mesh, but I feel like there's like 30 projects at Microsoft that all had the name Mesh at some point. And also there's a new one now apparently too. I don't know what it is, but it's unrelated.
This Mesh wasn't the metaverse Mesh, it was the collaboration Mesh, right?
Exactly. It was a collaboration. So we're using Mesh to do a bunch of things like, can we connect video games on different platforms together? Like that one concept we had was like, here's a Facebook game connected to an Xbox 360 game. And I did the prototype for that, like that kind of stuff. And then that eventually we got pinged by Xbox as they were like, hey, we found a home for your team and it's Xbox. And they want to take that technology and they want to make it into what became Smart Glass, which is now the Xbox app. And then that's kind of how I originally got put there. And then after that, I got tapped to go work on the Xbox One. So I did that, and then I worked on pretty much all console stuff and developer API facing things and operating system stuff there for a while. But I'd always wanted to get back to games. I think that pulled me away from like making games. So I was doing a lot of little prototypes at home. But of course, you get so busy, you get so tired, just from like, some of our release schedules was really daunting. Like I think when we did the Xbox One, I don't know how many hours we worked per week, but towards the end, it was some insanity. I ate 3 meals a day at work. I came home to sleep. That's kind of how it was. After we shipped it, it kind of comes back down. But I did that for a while. I had a kid in 2018, and that's where my perspective on things started changing. I started, you get very nostalgic once you have a child. So I was like, oh, I never did, get into like, making video games more or doing that. And then I also started being like, oh, I kind of wish I was doing something that had more meaning. So I ended up I had been working with this group that was doing some interesting things involving like neuroscience and such. And they had started this startup that was doing, it's like surgical navigation for brain surgery. It's like navigation and planning. So it's like tracking. They'll track your like the tools to like some extreme amount of like detail, so you can see where you are relative to the implant you're trying to insert in someone's brain or the thing you're trying to remove or whatever. And I was like, oh well, this has meaning. I don't know why. I felt like I need to go find something that had a deeper meaning than gaming. And I just felt that way at the time because I was like, oh, I should do something that I don't know, helps the world. So I joined up with them, and I did that for a year, and it was cool, and it was very neat. It was very hard, and it was just different. But I was in the U.S. and they were in Austria, and at the time, this is sort of where I kind of looped back into the James's world. We'd already, we were friends at this time. We were playing D&D at least once a week for many years. We're chatting about his new game idea for a few months now at this point. That I've like, it's like you start showing me off your demo. I think around this time, as I was starting to realize I missed gaming. I missed the gaming world. It was and I wasn't super happy with where I was at the time. The work was really cool what I was doing, but I just kind of like it wasn't my true calling, I think. And then so then James and I can't remember when he first started showing me things. It was like
probably
early in the year,
fall of 2019 probably.
I think you had mentioned you started something right around then, and then because I think you and I had dinner or something, and you pulled out your phone and was like, "Well, look at this thing I'm like doing," and I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." And then
in West Seattle, right?
Yeah. That restaurant's gone now.
This was a COVID game.
Yeah. Well, it didn't start as COVID game, but it became one because it was 2019. Yeah,
you joined after COVID started. I started the game slightly before COVID started, but
and actually that's kind of where I got the jumping off point. So we were talking about this game. I think at this point convinced you, like, how can you make a Monster Hunter-esque game without multiplayer? Like, how dare you consider that?
Yeah. And I was like, everyone loves local co-op, which is still true. And there's still this strange phenomenon where if you put local co-op in, people are like, oh, thank you, I'm so glad you're doing this. Everyone always tries to shove online co-op on, and you're like, shove, it's an insane amount of work to implement online co-op. It's closer to trivial to do local.
Right.
Yeah. And it's like, at this point, I think like you're just talking to me almost every day about this game, and we're kind of going back and forth about it, and I'm trying some stuff out. And at some point we're like, I think you're making jokes about like, oh yeah, you should just join me and do it then or whatever. And I was like, haha. And then one day I'm like, hey, what if I did that for real? And I was like, I could put in my 2 weeks notice. And then
that thing we were joking
and
about.
You're like, you should ask your wife first. And I was like, yeah, that's probably a good idea. And I asked her, and she was like, yes, you should 100% go do that.
So she was very permission.
Yeah, I got permission to do it, which is great. And she was super supportive of that. And I think we got a demo running with multiplayer within like a week or two. And we're like, oh, we knew the moment we played it, we're like, oh yeah, this is what it's going to be like. This is good. At the time, it was still Project Mage, which is
Project Mage. Yeah. Salt and Sanctuary is Project Tower, and then Salt and Sacrifice is Project Mage. That's the solution name under Visual Studio.
You're bringing up something I've been wondering about is how did you come toward the idea of salt as like not only a currency but part of the title?
Maybe now, embarrassingly, Game of Thrones, House Greyjoy. I loved how they had the spiritual significance to salt water, and it's just that. And there's a band called Cloud Cult. Yeah. Oh, it's just so metal. I love it. Yeah. I've read the books, so I can.
Right.
I can speak with authority, and when I speak about the pain that the series has caused me.
Exactly.
But yeah, that, and then there's this band called Cloud Cult that has I forgot what the name of the song is, but it's all about like the water. We all come from the water. We all go back to the water, and it's very
not to be confused by that Toady song. I come from the water.
Oh yeah.
I was sort of making up the ideas in my head about where that might have all came from, and I was like so off base. That's a great story.
What did you think?
I thought it was. We thought maybe it was commentary, like naming your game tragedy, and something like salt is like
tears, right?
Yeah.
I honestly, I didn't even. I had no intent of that connection. I didn't even think. I think it was people started saying, like, I started hearing people say like, "Oh, are you salty?" After
as the internet slang word,
yeah. Like I was not aware of the connection when I titled it that.
Yeah, pretty much everything in the first game has some nautical reference to it. It feels like too.
Yeah. House Greyjoy. I think originally the idea I was thinking of was like I've here and there I've been like I should make a roguelike, and it never works. But originally the idea was it was going to be a roguelike, and you would have you're like a ship full of sailors. You crash on some shore, and then one by one you play as a sailor, and they all have maybe different abilities, and then they're exploring this island, and on the island is actually, so maybe this is this is like an idea soup, but it was like, okay, so what if on the island there's like a mage's tower, and it's a different tower, a different mage every time the tower is procedurally generated, and so if it's a pyromancer, the monsters in the tower will be fire themed, and if it's a cryomancer, they'll be ice themed, and so that was like I think it was like 2010 ish when I was like playing with that idea, and probably started. I think I was developing it like in 2012-ish, but then I at some point I was like, no, it should just be a straight, like just a world, a designed world. We'll just do it like that, it was probably because I played Dark Souls, and then I was like, oh no, we can just do it like this. Castlevania, Dark Souls, that kind of stuff.
Notice a theme with James where it's like whatever game that's being played at that time has massive influence.
Well, you get inspired by what you are enjoying doing, so I understand that.
It's funny because like if you've played through Sacrifice, you'll see you can tell that we actually were playing the Demon Souls remake at the time because it kind of influenced a lot of like having the hub world and everything.
No,
but you mentioned like an idea soup, like you're a professional idea haver. How do you know when one bubbles high enough to the surface that it's going to actually be how you do your game?
Yeah, when you're excited about it, I think. I mean, it's because you'll have some ideas, and you'll be like, well, and it's always a struggle to between, on one hand, it's like, will this sell, and on the other hand, it's, am I excited about this?
Okay.
And
oh yeah,
yeah,
it has to hit both marks.
Yeah, there's like the purest idea of like, well, if you go the excited one, even if you don't think it'll sell, like maybe something in the excitement will come through. But I mean,
and also it's really hard to tell what will sell. So if you weigh too much that way.
Oh, and if you go purely on the sell side, you're not excited about it, you're never gonna.
Yeah,
I can't work on something if I'm not excited about it.
Right. Might as well just get a job, day job somewhere.
Right. I mean, exactly.
That's why I got into this, to be excited about stuff.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. That would be difficult. That would be difficult for me. What you started to talk about in terms of like the procedurally generated tower and the creatures and everything coming from a theme, I get hung up often on the idea of the tech and the platform, and that was really ahead of its time when you started talking about, if you're back in 2010 thinking about like, here we're going to do this procedurally generated world, and we're going to have everything sort of stem and sort of create on the fly. I mean, it was getting started already by then, but
yeah, I mean, I had a build that engine became the Salt and Sanctuary engine. I had a build running on Xbox 360 with the Xbox, the Xbox Indies Creators Club tools.
Yeah,
there was a whole system for like deploying code to a retail 360 pretty easily back then.
Interesting.
Rest in peace, XNA.
I would go that route. I'd have to get somebody to help me like turn it into some fun game, because I would wallow in the tech and the platform, and I want to.
So I think that's the thing that happens. I think roguelikes were popular because, well, they're also fun, but I think they became popular from a developer perspective, because as a developer, you're building systems. You like to build systems, especially if you're really in that kind of like deeper coding. Like you can get very carried away with that. And think of like, oh, here's ways I can do things to generate content without actually, especially if you're not artistic, right? and you're like, how can I work around my lack of artistic ability? And I think sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. Like sometimes like the games have like, here's an infinite things that could be generated. Suddenly all feel the same. Like, you know what I mean? Like because they're random, but they're still built on the systems that are in place. You start to see systems as you play through them.
Even the games that do it brilliantly, you still very quickly, especially if you see enough of it quickly enough, you see what the
I kind of burned out
like
from a lot of those games. Although I will say I played Hades, and that was the first one in a while that I was like, I got really, really into, because it was just so well done.
Yeah,
they kept it interesting. There's so much dialogue and so much like when you're back in the main area, there's like that would change every time, so it made it interesting. Like after each run, it was still interesting to keep going back and be like, one more run. I kept playing till like 2 a.m. or whatever when I was playing.
That's an interesting way to go. Having a core where there's a story and elegantly designed, and then having places where you're going off and generating content dynamically or procedurally generated might be a way to go. But very carefully and thoughtfully creating the world like you have for Salt and Sacrifice is another way to go, and allows you to articulate a much more cohesive vision and put it together and design each fight very consciously and very thoughtfully. So I've heard in some of these, and we've done like 20 of these interviews now, I've heard and been convinced that while I love procedurally generation and I want, artificial intelligence to be, creating content on the fly, the vision and care with developing an environment, handcrafting it and putting it in place has the much more potential to create a much more complete and compelling and interesting place to be and visit and play.
Yeah. And have you ever played? You've played Bloodborne, I'm sure.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's like the only PlayStation game I've platinumed, And the Chalice dungeons, you have to grind a lot in Chalice dungeons to get the platinum. And going from Chalice dungeons to like just the main world, it almost feels like going outside after like a day cooped up in the office, because everything is just so expressive and sprawling and just well designed. And then when you get into the procedurally generated, all these little dungeon segments that are just placed together, it's, I mean, your brain's like, yes, I know this segment, I know this segment, I know this segment. Like every piece becomes so familiar. That's here and there I've experimented with procedural, and really, I mean, the motivation, it's like, you're like, look at all these suckers like designing levels by hand. I'm gonna write a program that does it for me.
But I think content and
when I rigged up the Sanctuary engine to just be able to be like one big map, because before that, prior to that, the Dishwasher games, Charlie Murder, they were all like small map segments. Each one was its own file. And at some point, I figured out just this one simple trick to to just put it all in one big map world. And when I did that, I was like, I can just paint. I can just add to the world, and it's just super easy.
Interesting.
I got hooked like that.
Actually, the painting part of that is interesting, because it's what you don't realize looking at the game. The world in Salt and Sanctuary and Salt and Sacrifice is a ton of sprites layered and layered and layered, because James is basically painting sprites like a brush. So it's a ton of triangles on screen. So you're thinking like how hard could it be to render this 2D game? I think on PS5 or 120 hertz, right? It's like, how hard can you render 4K 120 hertz in your 2D? It's like, well, it's a lot more triangles than you think. And then you realize a lot of overdraw.
Tons of overdraw. Yeah.
So we had a lot of
parallax
optimizations there. Yeah. But it's nice that you had the freedom to kind of like really just like paint it, though. It's kind of neat. But it's in total disregard for
I even heard one of the reviewers who were talking about the game comment on a couple aspects, which now makes sense to me in terms of that sort of that completeness of this large canvas that you're working on, which is no real load times between areas as you're sort of moving around, and because it's that Souls-like, and you're going back and forth between different areas, and you're gaining abilities that allow you to get to new areas. You're also jumping potentially through doorways and to different parts of that canvas at different points in your journey, and being able to do that makes a ton of sense to be able to think about it that way. I mean, even if you were just doing
some textures are loaded dynamically, but we never unload anything.
Yeah.
So over time, Luckily, the game, it's only so big. I mean, I think the whole install size of the
memory
game
management garbage collection. Who needs it?
Yeah, just keep it all.
Well, as C# developers, the garbage collection is the enemy. So it's better to not free objects, because you what's that?
I think with Charlie Murder, I had to actually unload assets. But these Sanctuary and Sacrifice, they're both.
The early XBLA games were pretty limited, both in size and in like memory that you could utilize. Maybe I forget,
because it was
360 didn't have much memory.
Yeah, 512 megs. And it was dynamic. Oh yeah, PS3 was like only half of that was video. Xbox 360, it was I forgot what the word is, but it was flexible. It wasn't.
It was the shared memory.
Yeah, shared. Yeah. But yeah, it ran out, and it might have been less available for XNA games. I don't know. But I definitely, and that's one of the things where it's like, you make the game, you play the game works, but that one time you play the whole game from start to finish, and then you get a some kind of exception for couldn't load.
Right. Okay. So there's you said you worked with a QA firm, you worked with that sort of testing firm, and I've done that kind of testing where you're doing usability testing. I even did it where I was behind two-way glass, watching somebody use the software that we had written. I was the user interface designer for
Good Cop, Bad Cop.
It was reservation software for United Airlines just before the internet. So it was like it was out there for 2 years. It connected back to the Apollo mainframe via CompuServe dial-ups, things like that. But anyway.
Wow. Okay.
But we had like 12 metaphors that we started with. We boiled it down. But that watching people test it and behind behind two-way glass as you sort of gave them, hey, you got to go try to make an airline reservation. That was pretty fascinating. Not probably
is
just
it frustrating sometimes when you see someone like not do what you assumed was the obvious thing, and like you want to yell at them, but you realize it's actually your fault because if it's not as obvious as you thought it was.
I wonder, in comparison to difficulty to some of the Souls-like bosses versus our metaphors for trying to make a airline reservation. I think
but I think the difference here though is too, because we would get feedback from say Sony or whoever they're working with, and sometimes the person giving you feedback is not your target audience. Like Shuei Yoshida over at Sony, he's amazing, and he's pretty much one of our he likes Souls games, he likes our style game, and when he gave us feedback, we were like, yes, like this is good feedback because we just know he was the right person. We had certain people who were playtesting that we knew if we got feedback from them, like it meant something. But every now and then you get feedback from someone who's not maybe your target audience, but they still might have a good point. But it's like you have to parse it and go, okay, is it because they don't like this kind of game, or is it because, or do we actually have an issue here?
Right. Is it something that you can actually act on, or is it something that you need to store away?
Yeah. So you really want to like throw away the feedback. You're like they're not the right target audience, but you need to kind of like, no, hold on, let me look at it for a second. Okay, is there an actual user experience issue here that we need to consider? Yeah. And we didn't keep all feedback, but I think we were pretty. We changed a lot of stuff as things came in.
There was it was I remember a difficult point where in discussing the feedback, we asked, we were like, have you played Souls game? The guy's like, no, I don't play those types of games. And because it kind of goes back to people who like that style, they get the game, and people who don't, they won't. And and from our perspective, just kind of seeing this whole transformation, it really speaks to how incredible of an accomplishment Demon's Souls was. Just this completely random game that no one liked, and they stuck with it and they stuck to it, and now it's just it's
and
massive.
They just kept doing it again. They're
it's massive.
They're like, no, you're gonna like this game. You're gonna like this game. Like you're gonna like, and eventually everyone knows it.
So that's like what they were excited about, and they did it anyway, and it worked.
Exactly. Yeah. They were excited about it. I mean, who knows if it would make money? And at first it didn't. And I'm sure there were people involved who were like, what a jerk you were for making this game, for wasting all of our money making this, but it was like in enough time. I mean, the creator, Miyazaki, I mean, he's vindicated, right? He had an incredible vision, and he stuck to it, and like he changed the industry in just such a profound way. Hats off to him.
So yeah, it's rare that you see a new genres pop up, but every now and then.
Yeah,
every now and then. Yeah.
And I'm fascinated by it when it happens, and I really like that's the case. So this is a tough question, and there's not necessarily a right answer. But if you were going to give advice to someone who was thinking about going off the beaten path, or starting up something, or trying to do something that has a much more narrow niche audience, what is your advice? Go for it, or be careful.
Have a backup plan.
It's perilous journey. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, my advice is always have a backup plan. I mean, that's what I always wanted to make games. It was a hobby. I was doing it as a hobby for a while before I got my break. But I was going to college for just to for computer science, which you could do anything with that.
Right.
Related to computer science. I'm going to start a farm with my CS degree. But yeah, I mean, so the backup, I had it, but like just the break happened, which was awesome. But like, it's going to be so rare that happens. And otherwise, I mean, just,
also assume your first game is just going to fail anyway. I mean, like don't spend 4 or 5 years in your first game, because it's probably, I mean, even though
iterate fast.
Right, like even with James, right? I mean, yes, he had breaks, but it wasn't until Sanctuary where you really, made enough where you're like, okay, I get to do this forever now. Like I don't. There's not a concern anymore.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point.
How many games reach that?
I mean, they tell that to people, writers too. It's like write 100,000 words. Don't, write your same first book over and over and over again.
And you learn
fail
by
fast
shipping
or whatever.
Too. Yeah. Well, and fail fast is slightly different, but also very valid. So if you start a project and you realize it's not going the right direction, and the feedback you're getting is it's not working out, and you can't get the tech to work, don't fall into the trap of sunk cost.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to put in another 3 years and then fail slow and lose everything. Fail fast and iterate and do something else and do what's next. And you've got this, creative people have this plethora of ideas, and, sometimes to the true definition of plethora, which is maybe a few too many ideas, but you can choose from this basket of ideas that you have and then go do the next thing. And you learn by shipping as well. Right. Yeah. So I like what you said, Shane.
It was interesting when we were younger, I feel like every developer wanted to make a MMO when they first started. That was like always the joke. So if you were in the, game developer circles, you always saw someone pop like, hey, I want to make a new game and blah, blah. And I want to be this MMO. And everyone was like, no, don't. What are you doing? They're like, do you understand how much work you're signing up for? And it's going to fail. So why do a smaller project? And no one wants to do a smaller project. You want to do your dream project.
Right.
And I think figuring out how to scope everything down into a meaningful way and then doing that and putting it out there and seeing what sticks. Now I didn't go James's route. Obviously, James took a huge risk. I went the safe route of first accumulating wealth and then taking a risk.
I'm gonna have the day job for a while. Let James do the hard work. And
I just watched James till he's ready. I'm like, great, I'm gonna join you now.
But
that was not the plan, but it did work out that way.
I think that's another big bit of advice, though. Also, so you each now bring something relatively unique, and that that idea of the multiplayer and the networking skill and the platform, plugging that in, and James saying, "Hey, this better together, a multiplicative effect. Shane, come do this," and now you can sort of expand what's possible. I think that's something that people need to understand and think about too. And we've seen that in the people that we've talked to, especially the smaller studios, when they get complementary skills and expand out in that way, that they can do really interesting things and be, the sum of the parts is greater than the
I think what was nice is we like you mentioned, like we were working very complementary. Like we weren't really stepping on each other's toes much outside of like, oh, I accidentally broke that thing for you, sorry. Like other than like that, that happening every now and then. We kind of were both able to work at full speed. I don't think we ever got blocked by each other. Yeah. And then if you were blocked on something at all, you just move back to art for a while. Which you pumped out all of it.
So at some point, Shane added code to networkify all the particles, and we use particles for everything that can interact, that flies around, that can interact. So every arrow is a particle, every magical spell is a particle. I would just keep forgetting to networkify so many of them, because I'm always I'm the one who's like adding like new mage attacks, new weapons and stuff, and
I had to go through it. I'm like, hey, this doesn't work online, hold on.
There'd be a lot where because there were so many effects in the game.
I was doing a lot of code reviewing. Like you check in, and I would look through your code. I'm like, what did you touch? Which files were touched here?
It's literally. I mean, since when I had the short desk job. Aside from that, it was literally the first time that I was working on a project where someone else was working on the code at the same time. So it was a departure from the norm.
Yeah.
Where for me, of course, I had been at Microsoft before that, which is like. That culture, they code review very, And
the code review is
projects. Yeah,
it is a social shunning.
Yeah, and if you're working on something like Xbox, that's like your code and 100 other people's code is all kind of like intermingling in some way, and it's you get used to that after a while. But it was nice to be on a project where there's only, for me, I'm like only 2 coders now. Where it's like we have such an impact, and also your code velocity when you're. Not that games are less important, but if we have a bug in our game, it's not the end of the world. We can fix it. You don't want to release a broken operating system for a console, for example. So like your code velocity is much slower if you're working on like platform.
Sure.
But if you work at game code, you can really like
just pump. Test cycles. I think, the test harness and the places that you need to test just enormous.
And, exactly. Where it's like, I think with our game code, I probably produce at least 5 to 10x more code in the same amount of time, just because there was less due diligence. Not that we didn't do due diligence. I did build a test harness for the game, and we did do QA. We did stuff. Yeah. We didn't really do much code.
We did a lot of testing though, but it was such a complicated game that a lot of stuff came through.
We started testing early too. It was like
testing early kind of screwed us over a little bit, I think, because we were still adding so much content that so Yeah, like I think the critical path wasn't done when we started that, right?
Right. We only had the first few bosses in or something, I think.
But we were wanting to, because there are a lot of strange networking edge cases. We wanted to really air that kind of stuff out.
Sure.
But we put a lot into testing, and there's still, there'd be like there was one weapon that would make a cloud, like a poison. There's a bow and arrow that would make a poisonous cloud where it landed. And like only on networking it would cause a stun lock. So then that became the meta right away.
Right.
You have to get
And what I love is when people see those kind of things, like, did they even test their game? And I'm like, we had 40 alpha testers like a year in advance. We did like 4 or 5 different alpha like stages. We did a public alpha that we gave it out to people. We did a 10,000 person public beta. I'm like, dude, we had a QA for 4 straight months just playing it. I'm like, guys, we tested it. It just got a lot of edge cases.
This is something we like to do on this show, which is that's news that gamers can use. This is and hopefully they're getting a sense through talking to developers like you and hearing about it. It's a complicated profession.
Yeah.
Game development is a complicated profession.
It's a lot of systems that all touch each other, and every little tweak makes something else change unintentionally.
And for any random internet person to be off there and say, do they even play their own game? Do they even test this thing? Is just so off base
and uninformed.
Right.
Yeah.
So hopefully this kind of information going out there into the world will help cut down.
Yeah, and I think generally, the core knowledge of like how, like what it takes to make a game, I think people are more familiar with it now. Like I feel like I see gamers defending developers more now than before. Both will step in and they'll be like, oh, but this is super hard, blah blah blah, or yeah, they probably understand it, but is whatever. They kind of come to your defense more now. But it's still hard. You hear the negative comments and you're like, stick the heart.
It is hard. I can't even imagine. Yeah. When I was listening to you guys talk about coding, like Jeff said, we've done this about 20 times now. You're really, James, the first person we've talked to that did art and coding.
The warrior mage, yeah.
Well, he also did music in Sanctuary and all the previous games.
Most of
the music. Oh my god, I didn't know that.
I had a few collabs, but yeah, most of the music before Sacrifice. Sacrifice, we hired I don't want to say a real composer, but like he's he's a composer for a living. Like he's a really good composer. He does his name is McLean Deemer. He does the music for Guild Wars 2.
Okay.
But there's a lot of and we a writer for Guild Wars also moonlighted a bit for some of the writing in the game.
In the Seattle area, you'll find that if you don't know someone who works on Guild Wars, you know someone who knows somebody. For some reason, I don't know. It's like that's the circle that everything revolves around.
There's a couple of those sort of
ArenaNet. I don't know.
Yeah, niches around the country, which is great, which is actually really, really positive too.
I mean, even the smallest companies we've talked to, one of them's the artist and one of them's the coder. It's like,
oh yeah. So I have always really liked drawing. I've always been really artistic.
Well, it's awesome. Like your art, I find it very compelling. And the reviews I read of your game said the gameplay is also compelling. So I mean, you have you have it both. So why wouldn't you do them both?
Yeah. Right. So what I was getting to is so I've always liked drawing, and I learned how to write code because I just wanted to turn the drawing ideas into games. There was the means to the end, right? It was like I want to animate things.
That's why I learned how to code was games. It was like the moment I learned that coding was how games were made, I was like, great, that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
Nice.
And then I think it was like 10 years old. We were learning. Was it remember Logo, which is like
with the turtle?
Yeah, the turtle. Yeah. We did a class in that like 5th grade or something, and the teacher was talking about programming from there. And I was like, I was like, is this how Mortal Kombat was made? And she was like, yeah. And it was that moment at 10 years old where that switch in my brain was like, that's what I'll do. And I never deviated from the path.
That's awesome.
I say this. I've said this on all of our podcasts so far, but right back there is my Commodore 64, and that's where I started coding games in the 80s, early 80s, doing teaching myself game development first by copying code out of the back of Byte magazine and then custom coding up my own sprites and graphics, and back then it was sound also. They had like all these little subsystems in the Commodore.
Yeah,
so it was amazing. But nice. I taught myself software development because of games. But then it was different set of games, like Apple Panic and that kind of thing that I was inspired by. But yeah, same.
I think a lot of people kind of get into coding because of games, and then some people, I've seen people bounce off of coding where they really got into it because of games, and then during college they were like, actually, I don't really enjoy the coding part, but I do love games, and they went on to do something else. Or I've seen people who go into it and they're like, wow, I really like the coding part even more so than the games, and they kind of like get really deeper into that stuff and do something.
Well, the good news is if you want to get into games and you find you don't like the coding part that much, there's still plenty of jobs out there.
Yeah.
That have little or nothing to do with coding.
Okay, so we've talked about the origins and the past. Let's finish it up with a couple minutes. As you look into the future for what you guys are doing now, you've got the Salt games out there. You think, or even just the industry in general. 3, 4, 5 years out there, what do you see, either for yourselves or for the industry, or what do you think is coming down the road?
The one stupid thing that I can't wait for with the industry,
or
with technology on the whole, and last time I said this in an interview, the guy thought I was joking, but I really, really want it. So we have the technology, it just hasn't been implemented on a consistent level. Use AI speech generation where like you give yourself a name in Skyrim and everyone just addresses you by that name and it sounds totally natural and they're not saying, hey, you Dragonborn.
It's actually funny. That's what my wife does that at Microsoft. That's
right. Hey, you mage, come over here. Yeah.
Yeah. The tech exists. I want to see it. I want them to address me.
What's interesting because that tech can also be utilized to like impersonate people, and that's a whole like thing that people are worried about. Which you see it happening already, right? It's interesting.
I think that's a great one, and I would even go further and take GPT-3 and give the NPCs a personality engine based on that. So the people that do want to like walk around in Skyrim and be addressed by hey Jeff, come over here. I want to talk to you. And then you could do a little request, but you could still talk to them then and just like ask them about their life and just like sit down and have coffee with the shop. Well, and with GPT-3, it'd be like an infinite conversation generator.
Yeah, they'd be saying some crazy stuff too. I mean, it would like the developers would be like, we'd have no idea.
Did you play AI Dungeon?
AI.
It's not quite. I mean, it's similar to this where it's like you just say you want to do anything, and the AI just tries to keep up and keeps like playing along with you, and like things get really weird.
I haven't played it yet, but I've heard it. Yeah, you just. Yeah. Well, then I turn into the Incredible Hulk and I smash the spider, and it
goes off the rails very fast. But I think if you guide that stuff, you can make really interesting stories out of it.
Right.
Like, did you ever play Dwarf Fortress?
No, but I'm familiar with it.
You're familiar with it, yeah. So it's like that game is a ton of systems built on top of each other, and it's all emergent gameplay. But I always like the idea of emergent gameplay, and I think having that system built into like you said, like these 3D worlds that you can just kind of you can spend half your time just chatting with somebody and finding some interesting backstory, and that's what you share online, and it sounds very exciting, for people to read it or whatever. That's interesting. Like I like. And
you would have to do it through AI, and the tools will be there, and we'll be able to do it. But I CD Projekt Red was criticized for many things, but one of the things they were criticized in Cyberpunk was. They promised or people expected I should be able to like follow an NPC and like watch them like wake up in the morning, leave their apartment, go to their job, do their job, go to the bar after work and then go home. And I should be able to follow each NPC and like watch their life. And,
like, yeah. I mean,
we will be able to do that someday, but that is not. That's not
like you want to feel like you're interacting with the living world,
right? Right.
And then I wouldn't be surprised. I bet Red Dead Redemption 2 does that. I mean, that's a game I bounced off of, but I would not be surprised if they had that granularity of detail.
Well, imagine too, it's like if you went in, say you did a job for somebody in the game, and I don't know, you took out some factory or whatever you did. But then, like later on down the game, you're chatting with an NPC, and they're telling you about how that impacted their life, and you're like, "Wait a minute, I had some that's what my dad lost his job, and I had to drop out of school." You're like, "Wait, hold on, I feel worse about this decision." All of a sudden.
Does Dwarf Fortress have that level of detail?
It has a bunch of systems that can, end up being weird ways. But it does have a pretty deep system. Like, I mean, like people have hobbies and they have their work and they do things and they have relationships with people and they get sad if someone dies or something happens to them. I don't think it's presented in a way that is, as rich, but the systems are there.
Boy,
I think it has
coding and gamification of empathy. You go, whatever. You go into some random town, you kill some random guard because you're doing whatever, and then throughout the rest of the story, you you hear about all these people's lives that were impacted by this random act of violence that you have oh my gosh.
You feel bad the whole time. You're like, this game's depressing.
Right.
Star Wars: The Old Republic, the BioWare game that Jeff and I play sometimes or all the time, has a thing. You remind me of this thing that happens when you make choices in the game and do things. Like a day later, you get an email from that character. Yeah. I mean, it's a very low-tech way of doing it, but you get this message that they sent you over Galaxy email, right? That said, thank you for this. I was able to get my family out, or no thanks to you, I got this and this, and I'll be looking for you. And it's kind of satisfying.
Yeah, and that's a little way, and that's a hand-coded way to go about it. I mean, that's really clever.
Yes, it's not. And it's not procedurally generated or any type of. Yeah, it's just some person writing it, but it does provide that loop back to the decision you made.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I agree. Let's make that happen, and I think that's a good. So we'll circle back in a couple of years, and we'll see how that's going. We'll take Midjourney and GPT-3 and the image generation,
speech,
kind of conversation generation. We'll put all those things together, and those will be the platforms that we'll be developing on in the future. All right. Well, this has been great. I'm really excited to see also specifically what comes from Ska Studios in the future, and we'll be watching very closely as this develops. I'm interested to see where to get my hands on the game, hopefully in more places, and see it continue to grow. We'll definitely be showing it off in a couple ways throughout this interview. If people aren't watching the video, definitely check it out and get your hands on it, because it's great art, great gameplay.
It's beautiful.
A really fun experience. So thank you, both of you. This was really fun. I hope to meet up again, PAX West, to get out there to the West Coast and catch you guys next round as well. Did you say you go to every PAX, the PAX West at least?
There was a gap.
There was a COVID gap, but
Yep.
But this past year was our first year post gap.
Okay.
So,
I hope to
do it again next year.
Yeah, it was exciting to do it this year, and this was the busiest it's ever been because of the tournament we held. I think really drove a lot of crowd, and also you mentioned too the placement of it. Kind of like we had a really good placement. People coming. It was very exciting. Yeah, especially after not having seen people for 2 years.
Yeah,
I think that was nice. And terrifying to see that many people.
Yeah.
I know.
It's back and it's going strong and it's healthy for the industry and it's good to see. All right. Yeah. Well, again, cool. Thanks a ton. And this was great. And we'll talk to you guys soon.
Okay, thank you.
You too.
Thanks so much. Yourselves.
This has been a New Overlords production. For more, please visit newoverlords.com for video, subscribe and feed links, and other ways to help the show.